So hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 Kansas City React Meetup. See a lot of familiar faces in the participants list, so welcome back. I'm sure there's some new people, so if you're new, welcome. Hope you enjoy it, and please come back again. We are always looking for speakers. I booked February as of about an hour ago, so we have 1 month taken care of, but after that, this is a great way to try it out. Just either hit up me, other Joe Amadian, Max who's speaking, Kevin, lots of people. You can always either in the chat or you can email me or you can send me a message on Meetup. Anything is good. Doesn't have to be super specific to React. If it's just a good web technology that a React developer might use, that's also a great topic. So you don't always have to talk about React specific features or libraries. As always, we'd like to thank our sponsors. So I'll turn it over to Kevin to say a few words.
Hi guys, my name is Kevin. I work at a recruiting company here in town, Adaptive Solutions Group. Been with them about 8 years now. Yeah, if you ever want to, just talk about the job market, I mean, we're always working on jobs, but if you ever just want to have a conversation about the job market, what it's looking like, any sort of career advice, resume help, anything like that, we'd love to help out. So yeah, thanks for giving me some time and let me be here, Joe. Thanks.
Absolutely. And now on to our speaker, the infamous Max. Take it away, Max.
Infamous. Hey, everybody. I'm Max Schmeling. I am the CTO at Clipisode, building Answers RN, video, social video platform for brands. And I'm going to talk about Next.js. I figured this background was appropriate with the For the Win title. So hopefully Next.js can help you win, and hopefully the Chiefs can get a win in a week and a half. This is going to be really I'm not like a Next.js expert or anything. I just have started using it for some of our web tools and one external facing web application and then some internal tooling that we do, and it's been very helpful for what we do and our speed and everything. So I've kind of fallen in love with Next and just want to show it to you, give you an overview of what it does, why it's been helpful, and show you some of the neat things that make it really great. So I've got a few slides, but then I'm just gonna, jump right into a little demo and build a real simple new app using Next and show you what it does. So I just pulled this from the Next.js website just to give kind of the concise title of what they say about it, which is it's a React framework for production. And really, that's such a good way to describe it, because they just have everything set up in one package or one framework, one system with smart defaults, pre-configured everything that you could need to deploy React's web app to production. They focus on speed. They focus on really focus on developer experience, and just everything that a company may need to deploy something at a huge scale, or even, it works at every level, because it makes it so quick and easy that you don't have to have a big team of developers to get these production level configurations and high performance configuration. Like, it's just all there. So it's good if you're a small company of 1 or 2 people. It's great if you're a huge company. It works really at every level. And that's what's really helped me fall in love with it, is that it, more than any other framework I've worked with, works for every situation. We would always run into an issue, like with Create React App, we would use that, and then we need some like server-side rendering thing for a small, just one little place we need to render some Open Graph tags from the server or something, and you can't do that in Create React App unless you eject and do your own work. And there's always like little situations where you need to do something that doesn't work in the framework you chose. And Next.js is really the first thing we've worked with that lets you do everything really easily and works kind of within their system without you having to break out of it and then have your own configuration and kind of break what the simplicity of it. So you get to keep that simplicity while doing anything that you need to do advanced. One of their things is no config. I don't know how many of you have worked with Webpack directly, but there's a reason things like Create React App and Next and several others exist. And it's because that configuration is so hard to wrap your head around. It's, if you want to get hot reloading or fast refresh and server-side rendering and Typescript support and all these things, you've got to go in and install a bunch of dependencies. You've got to get exactly the right config, all set up to where all the different plugins feed into each other and loaders work together. And it's kind of a nightmare. And that's what we have on Clipisode on our main, like our primary web property that is exposed to the public. I did all that Webpack config myself, and I can't even remember how much time I spent on it. It was weeks of just working on the configuration, trying to get it right, trying to get the developer experience to where we could have the hot reloading at the time and all those things. And Next.js just removes all of that so that you don't have to worry about it, and you can get started with production ready Webpack config with all these different features in seconds. So a couple of the core features, things that it supports are the server-side generation and server-side rendering. That's what made was probably the most difficult part of configuring Webpack manually and setting that all up myself, was getting server-side rendering to work and work relatively well. And it still doesn't work as well as it does in Next. Next, just out of the box, supports server-side rendering and static site generation. So you can tell it this get static props method is like, you can feed the page props that it knows can be static, can be loaded from a static source, and then it can generate the pages and deploy to CDN directly, and not even have to have server-side rendering or run execute code to generate the pages when it's served. Or you can tell it you have server-side props and you want to render this page on the server. You want to render, create this data on the server every time, and it will automatically know when you navigate to that page, it has to go to the server, get those props, render the page using that data. And if you don't have either of those, then but you have dynamic code in your page, it can just do client-side routing. So you just automatically know no configuration necessary. It just knows, hey, we don't have to go to the server to get any data, so we can just client-side route. And so everything that you do in Next.js is kind of just smart to say, we can go get this page in the fastest way possible. We can go directly to it on the client side if there's nothing that has to be retrieved from the server, or it can go make a call in the background to retrieve that data from the server. It's just kind of smart about how it does it based on what functionality you put into that specific page. Another big thing that's a little bit difficult if you're setting that manually is getting TypeScript support. It's obviously doable, and there's lots of documentation out there to set it up. But in Next, no configuration, I guess technically there's configuration because you have to run this command to create a tsconfig file if you want TypeScript support. So you have to create a file, and then basically automatically you have full TypeScript support integrated with fast refresh and rebuilding on the fly, like through the project for backend, for server-side stuff. Everything, just TypeScript just works. It's really, really simple. It comes out of the box with fast refresh, which most of you are probably familiar with at this point, I assume, but it's the new successor to hot reloading. So you can make a change to your page and to any of your code, and it's automatically sent to the browser. It maintains the state of your components. It handles errors gracefully. It gives you, you get really detailed and clear error information in your page. And then when you fix your errors, it comes right back, and the development cycle and experience with fast refresh is just incredibly good. So I'll show you that when we get to the demo. Oh, I don't know what that guy's doing there. He's everywhere. So one cool thing about the way they give you nice defaults and kind of they're opinionated with how things should work is they give you file system routing in Next, and unless you try to work around it, that's, and specifically go and do a bunch of configuration yourself, which you really shouldn't need to do. Everything just works in the file system. All you have to do to create a route in your application is put a file. Just put a JavaScript file in the pages directory, and instantly you can go and navigate to that page, and whatever you added is there. There's no managing a React router component that has all the routes that you have to add to it. There's none of that type of stuff, configuring any of the parameters. It's all just there. And you can add just the parameters to your routes are just part of the file name and file path. So it's really easy to look at your pages directory and understand the structure of your web app just by looking at the files. And it's not necessarily going to work for every situation, but 99% of the time it works for your app, and it makes it incredibly easy to understand and easy to go between projects and see the structure and how it works the same way. And so that was one of the big things for us is between our different web applications. Before Next, we would have these components for routing, and they would all work a little bit differently, and maybe the latest thing that we created got a new version of React Router and worked a little bit differently. And so we would have to, jump back into that project. You'd have to go in and figure out how your routes worked again, figure out where your components are, figure out what component is the root level page for your users page or for your, details page or whatever. You'd have to search around. And with Next, it's just all right in that folder and very obvious how it works. So I think that's a big advantage. Another thing they have is API routes. So just as part of the pages file system, there's an API folder in there, and it works just like the pages, where the file structure is your route. And the difference is, instead of serving a page and with all the handling that has to go onto that, and the server, checking for server-side props methods and rendering, statically generating content, they are turned into API routes that are always handled, always ran on the server, obviously not generated and sent to the client. They aren't included in bundles, in the JavaScript bundles, and they can be automatically turned into serverless functions on the on the Vercel cloud and probably other places if you use that. We don't use the serverless function stuff right now because we host on Heroku, but it looks incredible and it's just automatic and free. If you use their hosting, you just create an API function in that folder, send it or check it in, deploy to their cloud, and you've got serverless API functions running in your app that you can hit from JavaScript. It's really straightforward. And then there's a whole lot more. We're not going to talk about most of it because there's just too much that it does for you. But it's got first-class internationalization support, really well configured, like code splitting and bundling. CSS modules are just there out of the box, which is another thing that's difficult to config. And image optimization, we'll go a little bit into that, where the new Next.js version 10 includes a image tag that handles as part of the just baked right into the tag. You can optimize an image to serve in the different formats based on the browser, and handles lazy loading correctly, and just more optimizations than I even know about to make images work fast and everywhere. So it's all this. That's why they say React's framework for production, because everything involved in really creating a high quality web app has been baked in, and it's just there with no configuration. So with that, let's just jump out and make a little demo app. So all you have to do to create a new Next app is use create Next app and give it a name. So we'll just call it Next Demo. And npx, for those that don't know, is just a little command line tool to automatically run npm package. So we're using the create Next app package and executing it. And that's just a little command line tool that will set up the project for us. So it'll install the dependencies, and there we are. So, and again, they focus on developer experience. So like just right here, we've got a blank slate, and it tells you exactly what you have to do, which is jump into your directory, npm run dev, and it started on localhost 3000. And it's compiled, so it ran its build process, compiled everything, and it's ready to go. And that's what you get with the basic setup from Create Next Step. So we can jump into Visual Studio Code and see what it created. So restart our server. So here's your basic structure. It comes with a public directory, and so there's first class support for just static files, static file hosting. So you can drop images into here and include them using the image tag, and it just works. It's automatic, and when you deploy, they get hosted in static hosting and the CDN, and are optimized, just all as part of the standard build process. Here's the pages directory, which comes with that home page that we saw, and then an API route. And then there's the styles directory, which has CSS, some basic CSS modules already set up. And you can see over here. So if we go in and change welcome to the demo app. Fast refresh, recompiles it, sends it straight over to the web browser, and you see it instantly, which, you know, is, again, something you can configure on your own with Webpack, but the amount of time, like we're 1 minute in and we have this incredibly efficient fast refresh already configured, and it just works. So I'll first thing I do, any project, is set up Typescript. So like I showed you earlier on the slide, you hit touch tsconfig.json and it creates that file for you. And then when you run the server, the only other thing you have to do, and it tells you very clearly, is run this command to install the new dependencies you need for TypeScript. So we installed them, and now let's rerun our server. Next.js detected the tsconfig and the dependencies, and so it populated that tsconfig JSON with their standard TypeScript configuration. But it is just a normal tsconfig file, so you can go in and modify this all you want, and it's not going to cause any issues with Next. So unlike, you know, some frameworks where all the config is hidden, you don't have to configure it yourself, but the config is there, and you can change it as much as you want, and it still will work in all of the Next.js environment and with hot reloading and the build and everything. So now we can take this index.js and make it a TypeScript file. And change that, and it hot reloaded. So it just took, or sorry, it fast refreshed, didn't hot reload, new terminology. It just took the rename of the file to a TSX file and still refresh the component with the built TypeScript component live in the browser without ever having to refresh. So if you've ever set up the fast refresh or hot reload on your own, at least in my experience, it's hard to get it to be that reliable. And so, you know, our project that was set up manually, like if you go and rename that file to a TSX file, it's like it's not even gonna like match it up. It's not gonna hot reload. You're gonna have to go refresh to get it to hot reload again. Whereas Next.js has basically, you know, perfect configuration that's been improved on, and the best integration of that has been figured out so that it's reliable and works all the time. So let's try some other stuff. Instead of exporting default, we don't export a default export in this file anymore. The page automatically refreshed or fast refreshed, and you get this really useful error information, and it tells us the default export's not a React component. So that's how it knows what to render for the page, is whatever is the default export is the page content. So we'll just go back, add default, fast refreshes, and you're right back to it. So let's try adding a new page. Let's call it users.tsx. And this is the file system routing. Inside the root pages folder, there's an index. That's always going to be your bare URL. And then users, if we export a users page, export default users page. Now, if we go over here and say users, we get that page. Again, no routing configuration, anything, just create a file in the right folder and your route's already set up. If you want to have a parameter, then that's just part of the file name. So we can create a folder called users instead. Put this in there and make that our index. And then create a new file called ID in brackets. Call this the user details page. And now that route is automatically configured that anything that matches that pattern, so anything /users/ anything, will route to this page and will be passed in wait a second. There we go. Thinking of the wrong project. You have to use the router. And import the router from Next. And now you've got the ID passed in from your route. And what's really handy about this use router hook is you can use that at any level. So instead of passing in the props like I do in my other project, at the page level and then having to pass that down, you use this hook. And if you need that user ID down at a user details component or somewhere for a link to the current user or whatever, you can use that hook anywhere you want. So that's really handy, and it just pulls straight in from this parameter. If you put another page in here, the routing is smart enough to say, okay, our details page, there's a specific page that matches that route. So instead of using that dynamic route, we're going to hit this one first. That takes priority over our dynamic route, and we'll render that instead. So it will fall back to anything, or it will prioritize that, and then we'll fall back to your ID route if it doesn't match something more specific. So again, this doesn't work necessarily for every situation all the time, for every project, but in my experience, it's about the best routing system you can have, because it's so easy to understand and so consistent. So between project to project, it's super clear. So then let's take an image, like this React image, and we'll just drop it into our project and go to any page here. And we will use the magical new image component from Next and just say the source of that image is /React. Give it a width and a height. And go back here. And there it is. So you can see we don't say /public. It's this static assets directory is served from the root, and anything you drop in there is just automatically available off of the root of the project. So we could create a new folder called images and move that in here. And it'll still serve from or use that same routing, folder-based routing, just like all the other API routes and page routes. And if you look at this component, if you look at this image, you can see all of the generated code for it. So all we did was say a source and give it a size, and it has the decoding async, it has source set, it handles all of that behind the scenes to optimize this image. You don't even have to think about it. And my understanding is it will generate multiple formats of the image so that modern browsers can be served the most efficient image formats, and older browsers can be served more standard, PNG, JPEG formats of images, and it just handles it all behind the scenes. You don't even have to think about it. So then API routes. Let's create users.ts. So here's the default one it gives when you create the project. So we'll just take that, and it just sets the status code, returns JSON. You have full control here. You can do whatever error handling and spit back whatever format you want. You can spit back XML. You can spit back HTML if you wanted. Just anything you want to return here. So we're going to return an array of users. And if we go over here and hit the API users route, it's right there. And unlike a page, there's a lot of stuff that this strips out. So it doesn't, it's not sending HTML, it's just raw JavaScript. So there's no hot reloading or fast refresh or anything because it's just an API route. It's much simpler, but the code still runs through the same fast refresh in the server, so that when you update it, it's rebuilt, and internally, it's processed and cloud that file and refresh it, so that if we do come over and refresh our API route, we have the new code. So this makes debugging just super smooth because every little change you make is instantaneously available. So like for our project, we use API route. Since we use a GraphQL server, we use an API route to proxy requests from our Next.js app to the actual API, which is written in Ruby. and host it as a separate project. We have a API endpoint that just handles authentication, handles the the session from the front end perspective, and tacks on the authentication header and forwards the request on to the actual API server. So the session is handled just like everything normally with a page. When JavaScript sends a request to the GraphQL endpoint, it's hitting the next app's API endpoint. The next app looks at the cookies and the session, and then tacks on what it needs to for the actual backend server call. And so it makes being able to get API calls that can run both server side and from the JavaScript just super simple, because they work exactly the same way. All you have to do is configure one API endpoint that can handle it from a Next.js perspective, and then the rest of your code doesn't have to think about it. And it just works out of the box with Next to have that API endpoint integrated into the system with no extra configuration. And let's see if there was I think we've touched on just about everything except for get server side props. So let's look at that. So this users page, right now we don't export any other code from this page except for the page itself. So it doesn't have server side props, it doesn't have static props, it's just a basic page that doesn't take any outside information, which means this page could be statically generated and served without running any code on the server. But if we need some server side props, we can export this function. And let's just pull this same thing right now from our API and put that in the props. In this function, actually an async function, this function can run API calls, it can do authorization checks, it can do anything, and it's async, so it will wait for it to return and before it spits back the result to the page. And then it will pass the props that you give it directly to the page. So give it a key so it doesn't get mad at us. Did I typo something? Well, I did this right before the meetup, and it worked perfectly. There we go. I don't know. Maybe it has to have the context for it to work, but there we go. So now these users are created or generated, the data, the props are generated on the server. This method is not bundled, is not sent to the client. It could never be executed on the client because it's simply not there. It only exists on the server. And that data will, when this page renders, will always have that data available to it from the server side and then present on the client. So if we go and look at the actual source of the page, you can see that data, page props, was sent down with the page so that when it re-renders on the client side, it's all there. The page never renders with an empty state or hydrates and flashes the data away while it loads it in or anything. The data is there from the server and it's not retrieved client side at all. And then you can also see that the actual content of the page is server side rendered. So those elements are rendered on the server, sent to the client, and the data is there so it can rehydrate properly and have no flash of empty states or wait for data loading on the client side. So if you know, all the standard use cases, if you need data loaded from an API that can't have client side calls or anything like that, or if you just need search engine optimization or just quicker rendering, quicker loading on the client, then it just works out of the box. You don't have to think about anything else other than this method. And if you have that method and it returns your data, you know that it will render it on the server side and be ready for you immediately when it's sent to the client. To demonstrate this a little more, we can create a link from the home page using the next link component. And you have to use this component for handling the client-side routing, the server-side fetching when it's necessary. This component is what knows how to do the routing in the most efficient way while still getting the data required and doing the background stuff. So we wrap a anchor tag with that link component, and it will configure the link component to work how it needs to work for the routing. So in here, we'll do a link that goes back to home. Okay, so now our navigation to users and back works. So let's watch what's happening in the inspector. You can see when we navigated to the users page, it made this JSON call. So it's the same route as the page /users, but it automatically added this .json and did this call in the background. And what it does is just runs, it knows, hey, this page has server-side props. So we have to go get that information to be able to render the page, and it has to be retrieved from the server. So let's go make a JSON call in the background, or a JavaScript AJAX call in the background, hit that same URL for the page, but tell it we just want the data. It goes, runs your method, gives you back the server-side props, and then it renders that page client-side. So the client already has the page. It already has that JavaScript on locally on the browser. So instead of wasting time to go to the server, render, get the data, render the page, spit back all the HTML and JavaScript, and run that page, at that point, it goes, I already have it all. Let's just go make a quick request for the data, get that data back, and then we can render the page without having to transfer all that other stuff along with it. And all that's handled without any really even knowledge by you that that's what's going on. You don't have to think about it. You just have to add the get server side props, and it's all handled by that link component and the Next system. So if we were to take that link component away and just go directly to it, you would see since there's just a raw anchor tag, you don't see that Ajax call anymore. We just did a regular full client or full server navigation. So that link tag is just handling all the smarts for you. It knows what to do, when to do it, based on nothing more than the information that it can get from the page during the build. And so you don't have to spend time configuring it and thinking about it. Every page that you do can be configured individually with the right properties, with the right functions, and Next will just figure it out and do the right thing. Last little thing I want to show, I'm really out of time, is environment variables. This is a really handy feature where if you want to have an environment variable and you want to have it available anywhere, so not just on the server side, because typically your environment variables are available on the server, but they're not on the client. You can prefix your environment variables with next_public, and then whatever you want to call it. And then that environment variable will be automatically packaged up with your JavaScript and sent to the page. So let's not do it on a server render page. Let's go back here and say process.env and put that in. And I do think for these you have to restart. And that environment variable is now available in your page, but it's also available server side. And so you can use it in both locations. And that configuration, like for us in Heroku, we can go set those environment variables on our individual deployments or staging our production deployments. And those environment variables, the ones we specify, get sent with the client bundle and take no configuration on our part, which is, again, another thing that took some work with deployments in manual configurations. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
I have a question about get server side props versus get static props. I'm working on I kind of just want to get your take on how you would make the decision on something like this. I'm working on a Next project right now where I have content coming from basically like a headless CMS. So that content, it's triggering a static build, first of all, and then obviously locally I'm pulling it in as well. So that content doesn't change very often, and when it does, it would trigger a new static build. So I'm inclined there to use get static props. But then the issue is on the app that I'm building, I have other content coming from basically an API that needs to be dynamic based on the particular user. So I'm in the situation of trying to decide where I should use get server side props to pull all of that in from two sources. But then I'm obviously like re-hitting my headless CMS every time versus pre-rendering that statically, or where I should start using like client-side API fetching and that sort of thing to kind of pull in the user-specific data. How do you kind of make that determination?
So is the user-specific data, it's on the page with the static data?
Yeah, so I'm pulling back basically like site frame information from the CMS, but then I'm pulling back user-specific information from a different API, and you can't intermingle server-side props and static props on the same page, unfortunately. So then I'm trying to make this determination of like, should I use server-side props? Then I have, like a slower time to first byte, and I'm kind of hitting the rate limit on my CMS API, where I could easily statically render that, but then I can't use server-side props because I can't.
Right. So the first thing that comes to mind, and to be clear, I've not really done anything with the static site generation side of it. I've just read about it a little bit, but my first thought would be static site generation doesn't mean you can't have any dynamic content in the page. So you could generate that static, do it all with get static props and load that data at build time. And then the, user information or whatever it is that you need to show around it that's dynamic can be loaded on the client. The client it could be a component that starts with no data in it and doesn't show or shows placeholder information or loading status, and then it loads from the client through an API call, and that way you don't, because you don't want to be, I wouldn't imagine you would want to be hitting that CMS directly every single time a user makes a request, because like you said, it's going to slow down your time to first byte and everything. But you can't get around dynamic calls there. So just put that dynamic content on the client. Don't server-side render it, but you can still have dynamic content within your static rendering. So that would be my first thought.
Okay. Yep. And that's kind of the approach I made too. It was just kind of one of those determinations of like, does this make sense to do with get server-side props, or should I be doing kind of that combination of static rendering plus client-side fetching? And I ended up going with the latter. But yeah, I just kind of want to get your take on what
yeah, I think there's the other approach might be, I think that makes sense. I think it's probably the best way to do it without giving it too much thought. But you could render your pages using static site generation, and then have like an iframe where your user information is fetched server side and rendered immediately, and the iframe loads the content underneath it. Loading another page in an iframe maybe not the greatest way to do it, but then that would be a way to have the server side rendering of that content if you needed it without fetching every time.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I just had more of a comment because I've gotten into Next recently too. I was a little disappointed to figure out that the default Next starter did not have linting or unit tests, but I did find that there was an official starter that you can use from the CLI, which I can post in the Zoom chat.
Great.
That'll set up TypeScript, ESLint, and Jest. It's only good for a new app, really, because you have to use the Next CLI. But
even if you have an existing Next app, you could install that starter and look at how it's configured and pull some of that over if you wanted to. Normally, like I said, first thing I do when I create a project is TypeScript. But there's other things, the linting as well, and the big one, the big one is Prettier. I couldn't ever have a JavaScript or TypeScript project without Prettier these days, and that's not in their default starter app. So
well, it is in this one.
It is in that one. So that sounds like a great starter with the unit testing and the Prettier and TypeScript. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, no problem.
Anyone else? Well, if no one's got any questions, then feel free to hang around and chat, but otherwise we'll call this it. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, and Joe Morgan's having connectivity issues, so I'll wrap it up for him. If you don't know me, I'm Joe Amadian, one of the organizers for the meetup. Appreciate you guys attending. We're gonna post a recording on the meetup page as well. So feel free to share that with others who are interested. And also feel free to share any feedback on the meetup page as well. We're very receptive to that. Also feel free to share the link to the meetup event while we're all virtual. Anyone, anywhere can attend. So And then if you're interested in presenting, feel free to reach out to me, Max, the other Joe Morgan, or Kevin as well. You don't have to be super experienced in presenting. So don't let that be a barrier. As long as you're not selling something, we'll be open to it. And then we do plan on staying virtual probably till the end of the summer. That may or may not change, but we'll keep you up to date on that. But if you are interested, if you're an employer who's interested in hosting and bringing a lot of people into your building later in the year when it's safe, you can reach out to any of us, but I'd encourage you to reach out to Kevin Stone if you'd like to get on the wait list for something like that. So thanks again for everyone attending, and hopefully we'll see you next time.